Hello everyone, Marine here for FAWN. Thank you so much for joining me and this cute bear. Today we're going to get all flowery with a beautiful stencil background, and we will give our sweet little bear a shaker honey jar. But first, let's check out some of the products I'm going to use. We have How You Been and the coordinating dies. My greeting is from the How You Been strawberry add-on. We have the dripping die from Ice Cream Use Cream. The banner die is from the Heart Garland Backdrop Landscape die set. And for the other sets, I will detail them later in the video for more comprehension. And the yellow paper I'm going to use as honey is from the Watercolor Wishes Rainbow Paper Pack. So, as very often, the idea I had in mind included lots of bits and pieces, so I needed a bigger panel than the usual A2 size to be able to fit all the pieces. Last time with the elephant baby card I had the same problematic, and I used the shutter card die set to have a large panel. Well, for today's card I used the main die from the Peekaboo pop-up die set to cut my panel and have plenty of room to fit everything. So I cut the panel out of Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock. I taped it on my glass surface, and I'm first working on the lower part. I need to ground my spring scene, so I'm using stencils to create grass at the bottom of my panel. I'm first using the grassy stencil to get a straight grass border. Next, I'm using the grassy hillside stencil, and as for the inks, I'm using Shabby Shutters and mowed Oxide inks, which is my favorite green combo to make bright spring cards. So I'm covering the bottom part with the grassy hillside stencil. And now we can move on to the upper part. I'm gonna use the Spring Blossom stencils to color that section. I'm using Shabby Shutters and mowed Oxide inks again to create all the greenery. And then I will use pink shades to emphasize the spring look I had in mind. So it looks really nice already, but you know me, I like to add splatters on most of my cards. I'm first gonna add rustic wilderness oxide ink splatters and white ink splatters on the grass borders. And on the flower section, I will add mustard seed oxide ink splatters and white ink splatters as well. Now it's time to start working on the honey jar. I stamped the jar from How You Been on white cardstock using crunchy leaf ink. I used the shaker coordinating die to cut it. I stamped the jar a second time using the same ink on a piece of watercolor wishes rainbow yellow paper, and I fussy cut that yellow jar. Now on the blank jar, I want to keep the outside edges white, but I want the inside edges to be yellow. So to achieve that, I'm first going to stick the fussy cut yellow jar on top of the other. Next, I am going to use the shaker coordinating die again. I'm attaching the die to the jar using washi tape, and I'm sending it to my die cutting machine. It's going to cut an opening inside the jar. And see, now the inside edges are yellow, just as if the whole jar was filled with honey. So we're keeping that middle piece, and we're going to work on the shaker. The yellow jar in the center will be the base. And we also have this acetate jar that will go at the back of the first jar. So first thing first, I'm lining the first jar on top of the yellow one, and I'm putting the middle piece back on its original spot. Next, I am adding liquid glue at the back of the first jar, and I'm gonna stick the acetate jar to create the window. Now, we need to make dimension for the shaker pieces. I am using 2mm foam strips to do that, and I am peeling all the backing papers off to be able to bend the foam more easily, and this way follow the shape of the jar. Next, we don't want the sequins to stick to the foam. We want them to move freely inside the jar. So I am rubbing my powder tool inside the jar all along the foam strips edges to make them non-sticky. A quick clean to remove the excess of powder, and now we can add our shaker pieces. I picked some golden heart confetti from my stash. I poured all of what I had left. And now the final step to complete our honey jar. I am adding tiny dots of liquid glue on the foam strips. And now I attach the front of the jar to finally close it. And here you can see that thanks to the powder, the confetti do not stick to the inside edges of the jar. So just a few extra details that I want to add to this jar. I cut a tag out of speckled eggshell cardstock using dies from the stitched teapot die set. I cut the lid out of paperback cardstock, and I added dot details with the brown marker to give the illusion of a cork texture. And I stamped and fussy cut another yellow jar that I am going to use to create dripping honey. I am using a die from the Ice Cream Use Cream die set to cut this dripping piece, and I am going to stick it to the shaker jar along with the lid, the tag, and some twine as well. And our honey shaker jar is done. Now I am going to work on the bits and pieces I want to feature on my panel. On the left, I have the elements to make the bear. And to cut them all, I used the main die, the nose pieces and eyes from Woodland Critter Huggers, the earmuffs from the winter add-on to make the ears, this strawberry die from Stitched Cupcake to make the snout, those tiny round pieces to make the cheeks, and small earmuffs for the ears from Build a Snowman. For the bees, I used the dies from the Meadow Backdrop Portrait die set. I also used the grass dies from that set, and the rounded pieces to make bigger eyes and paws for my bear. And to create the flowers, I used dies from the Spring Flowers Backdrop die set, the stems from Little Flowers, and the leaves from the Apple Border die set. So I'm going to assemble all those pieces, and I'm starting with the bees. I cut the pieces out of Storm Cloud cardstock, black licorice, sunflower and vellum, and I'm first adding a little bit of black soot oxide ink on the edges of the bodies to bring a little bit more depth. So here's the first bee, and with her friends now. I just added a white dot on the eyes to make them more cute. And next, the flowers. I cut the pieces out of ballet slippers cardstock, white cardstock, cilantro cardstock, and shimmery yellow from the pastel pack. And just like the bees, I am adding more depth to some of those pieces. I am adding one lipstick oxide ink on the pink flowers and Modlon oxide ink on the greenery. And next I will assemble the flowers. And the flowers are done, super pretty. The one with no stem will go on the bear's head. And speaking of which, it's now time to work on the little guy. I don't need the arms and ears, so I'm first trimming them off. I cut the pieces out of paperback cardstock, craft cardstock, chocolate bar cardstock, ground coffee cardstock, vanilla malt cardstock, ballet slippers cardstock, and black licorice cardstock. And I'm gonna add vintage photo and ground espresso oxide inks on the paperback pieces only. So now, before sticking everything on the panel, I am going to assemble the bear and the jar. I'm first attaching a paw on each side of the jar using 1 mm foam squares. Next, the jar on the lower part of the bear. And then all the pieces to make his face. Now let's get everything and everybody on the panel. I am starting by attaching our friendly bear using foam squares and liquid glue, and I will use foam squares mostly to stick all the other pieces. So, a quick break to stamp my sentiment. I cut a banner out of guava cardstock, and to stamp my greeting more easily, I put the banner back on its original spot using washi tape at the back. I treated the paper with powder to make it anti-static. I stamped my "You are such a sweet friend" greeting using clear ink. I sprinkled white embossing powder on the ink, and then I used my heat tool to melt the powder. So now I can attach the banner in the middle of the panel, right above the bear, and then the bees will go on both sides. And it looks like we are done. I love how it turned out. It feels like spring so much. I hope that you like it too. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you in the next video. Have an amazing day. Bye.